Hey guys, welcome to session number 40 of the Trailer Music Composers Podcast.
One man who still cannot do a good American accent. Welcome to the Trailer Music Composers Podcast.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Trailer Music Composers Podcast. In this podcast, I have someone super awesomely special. I'm so happy to have this guy on the show because of his huge amounts of experience and, frankly, the fact that he shaped the industry we are in today. And he sort of walks us through how that all happened, and it's just fantastic to hear. Now, this is Jeff Fayman from Immediate Music fame. He's done so much for our industry, and the stuff that Immediate are producing is just fantastic, and I just love hearing the process of how Jeff got into trailer music, and also his advice for composers is just brilliant, and very, very much in line with my advice that I give to aspiring composers. I really, really hope you enjoy this. I really enjoyed the interview, and I think Jeff drops some huge hashtag value bombs. And it's just great. Really, really enjoyed it. So I hope you enjoy it too. Guys, welcome to another episode of the Trailer Music Composers Podcast. I am so honored to have this guest on my show today. I would obviously have done a massive big up intro prior to this, but Jeff needs little or no introduction. Yeah, I'm quite frankly, Jeff, so speechless that you are here recording this with me. So thank you, first and foremost, for being here.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah, I know lots of people are going to be very excited to hear this. So, Jeff, for those who of the audience who don't know who you are, could you tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm Jeff Fayman. I've been a music composer for many years. I started out wanting to play in progressive rock bands. That was my goal in life, was to be in very highly progressive rock bands playing drums, and then eventually I kind of taught myself keyboards. And when synthesizers and MIDI came out, it was this huge revelation that I could slow down, play some music into a computer, come up with an idea, and then build on it. And something, because I never had the formal orchestration and learning in a formal manner of composing with pen and paper and doing that, but I could always use my ear. And so when I had the ability to take music, take sounds, and start with a piano track, start with something, and then just say, oh, here's a string idea, here's some brass, and the better that the samples got and the ability to create a more real sounding orchestral arrangement, the more exciting it was for me. And I honestly never did music during that time thinking I was going to have a career out of it, because I kind of put my progressive rock success on the side, and I was working just a decent job, 9 to 5, in order so that at night I could be left alone and just compose anything I wanted to do. And I was always really fascinated with classical music and film scores. And so I kind of was experimenting with kind of a hybrid of both. And I had a friend who many years ago in the 80s who happened to be a trailer editor, and I had played him some of my music, and he said, wow, your music's really kind of cinematic. And I said, oh, cool. And he said, would you like to score a trailer? And I said, sure. I had no idea really what a trailer was or what it involved, but it sounded fun. And it was one of the worst movies. It was called Mutant Hunt. It was like very low budget sci-fi, not even a B movie, like a C or D movie, but the trailer was so much fun, and I got to do whatever. There was no, back in those days, there was no temp score. So he just gave me a film, a videotape, and I somehow sunk it all up to my computer, and I just started coming up with ideas for this. You know, it was like a 90-second trailer, and it was so much fun. And then I got paid, and I thought, okay, wow, this is great. And for me, it was more about that. It was really fun. And then through him and through some others, I started getting more kind of gigs, doing music for some really low budget trailers, doing music for what they called the EPK, electronic press kits, where a film studio would be putting together a reel of, let's say, a 10-minute reel showing what their new movies coming out were going to be in the coming year. But they didn't really, in those days, have music temped or scored to it. Sometimes they would, but they wanted to have more original music. So I would watch these things and score it. And it was a lot of work, but it was fun. And then I started making enough money where I didn't have to do my other job, my 9-to-5 job. But the work wasn't as consistent as I would hope, but I just knew that if things got really busy, it could be really good. So I continued just on my own, experimenting, like watching trailers, trying to emulate the kind of sounds that were mostly an orchestral trailer, because back in those days, a trailer would use the music from a previous film, because the trailer wouldn't have had the music from that film already done yet. The film music in a film that's being completed is the last thing that's done. So a trailer that's coming out 3 or 4 months ahead of the movie wouldn't even have access generally to that. So they would use music. Let's say in a movie that's an action movie, they might use a movie back then from Terminator or The Fugitive or whatever it was. But usually those were big sort of orchestral pounding scores. And in those days, it was very difficult with the limited of the music libraries of the sounds and the quality of them to get this massive sound that was needed to try to compete, because they would call it, 6 o'clock at night and say, we're on the scoring stage tomorrow at 10 a.m. and we need some finished music. And here's these pieces by, these major composers. We want you to do something like it. Can you do that? And it was like, yeah, but it was a grind. And so while I was doing this, I happened to go into a music store in Santa Monica and just kind of looking at equipment. And there was a salesperson there, consultant, who I could see they were really good with twiddling the dials on some of these synthesizers and I was not good at that. And I started talking, and it became my partner, Yoav Goran, who he was music consultant, and I asked if he would consult me and show me how to use some of these samplers and synthesizers that I had very basic ability in. And I started working with him, and he was a filmmaker at the time. He'd graduated from NYU, and he was making his own film, and he was also a musician, and we started sharing our music and our music experiences with each other. And we realized we both really had a passion centered around epic film music and similar composers and styles. And so we started, just for the fun of it, starting to work on some music together, which I had never really collaborated with anyone. And it was like we kind of had ESP. I could start a piece of music, he could listen to it, and then sit down and come up with the finish or a break. And then, and then we could work really quickly together. And we realized, we should maybe put together a demo. And so what we did was we put together a demo of some music. And back then it was even just putting it on a cassette player. And at the time there was, I'd say, seriously, maybe 10 or 12 trailer production houses in all of Los Angeles, which there probably is 310 or 12 now. But we took our demo to all these places, and one of them responded. A music supervisor thought, wow, it's pretty cool, and started giving us opportunities to work on some of their trailers. And again, in those days, it was they would then start temping with some previous film scores that were usually very orchestral and very huge and orchestrated, lush and powerful. And we would have to emulate that with these little boxes we had at the time by layering and layering and layering sounds. In order to get one big tom that sounded like a big trailer tom, you might have to take and put together 5 sounds to make one tom, or one big string line was like 4 or 5 sounds. So it was a process, but we started getting known for being able to turn around music quickly and make it sound pretty epic. And therefore we kind of took on the name Immediate Music, which is a really lame name, but that's what people wanted at the time. Is they wanted music immediately. And so we would do these trailers custom. It was, at that time, it was just all custom. You know, you'd get a trailer, you'd work freaking 72 hours on it, and then, you know, you rest a little, and then you might get something else. And so sometimes in our downtime, what we started doing was just composing music for fun that we really liked. We started knowing what the music supervisors and producers liked. We started knowing styles, and without it sounding generic, we knew that, you know, a piece of music from Aliens that's a chase scene, or Terminator, it had a certain style that if you do something that's inspired in that way, people might like it. So we wanted to show as a demo, we could do all different kinds of music. Here's a big romantic, lush theme. Here's a romantic comedy. Here's, you know, so in doing that, we started putting together more demos for our clients. And then at one point they said, well, it's great. Can we license this piece of music? And we were like, sure. You know, that never occurred to us. And that they would take our piece of music, which then made sense, because the problem as composers, I'm sure as you know, and anybody working, is clients' love of temp music. So when they have a piece of temp music in a spot and you don't do it exactly like it, it is so hard to get around it, because they're so in love with it. They've heard that piece of temp music in this thing they've edited 100 times. And the minute you try to approach it, the best you're going to do is they're going to say, well, all right, I guess that works. You know, it's never a clean slate. So when we would start giving people music that was original, that we'd composed, they would start to fall in love with it as it became their temp music, and we didn't have to change a thing usually. Sometimes we'd have to make adjustments, but it was kind of, we broke through this barrier of having to beat a temp track by starting to give them original music that was without it sounding like generic library music, because libraries had a really bad name then, music libraries. Today, music libraries are incredible. Some of them are more cutting edge, and the sounds are as good as any pop music or scores. I mean, it's really developed. But in those days, music libraries was really looked down. Nobody would consider looking for in a major film from a music library. And so we started probably one of the first exclusive trailer focused music libraries, and got known for doing that. And what happened was the demand for getting new music through our music library became more than the customizing to picture of original scoring, so that which meant that we could spend more time and energy creating new music that we knew a lot of clients might respond to, which they did. And at that point, we started bringing in friends who we knew had worked in film or television, and tried to help direct them as to kind of the type of production needs for trailer music. And so it kind of expanded through there. It just kind of, so it 25 years later, eventually, you know, we had and we didn't really have a large catalog. We were very particular. And I think one of the things as a publisher or catalog owner that's very important is your branding, meaning that I'd say of the, you know, 95% of the music that may have gotten submitted to us down the lines, maybe 5% we would take, you know, or I mean, of 100%, maybe 5%. So we felt what was really important was keeping up a branding or an image of what clients would expect when they would listen to our next release. And I think some music catalogs have taken on music by the pound, where it's more important just to have a ton of music, which in their area may work better because the clients just need a huge variety of music and they need hundreds of thousands of different types of tracks for whatever application in blanket deals. And ours was a very specific market, a one-to-one, this will work for this trailer, and you know, and it was a one-for-one licensing situation like that as well, so that we would create customized releases, particularly in a much narrower genre base, where eventually even the kinds of genres that we started out with, where we would have romantic comedy or you know, action rock and things like that, those started fading away, and it just became mostly focused on big epic trailer score, and that became sort of what we were known for. And then eventually we got to a point where we decided to fund doing an orchestra and choir project on our own without any influence of any other entity. And we went first to Seattle, and then we ended up going to Abbey Road. And it was an incredible experience because I mean, for us, it was more about trying to create the music at the highest level we could. We thought, well, maybe we'll make our money back in 5 years or whatever it would be, hopefully. But the pieces started licensing and doing really well, really quickly. And we didn't spare any expense. We kind of went for it, and the clients that we worked with appreciated it. They appreciated that what we had done did not sound like typical library music, and it could compete against any film score. We were working with really amazing mixers who worked and mixed film score, and we took it to the highest level we could. And that kind of, I think, became our branding, was that we were looked at as we were not inexpensive, but we had very high quality music. And here we are today, except that we've since our catalogs have been acquired through BMG Production Music, and we were there for a period of 3 years overseeing and producing content for we had another catalog, which was One Revolution Music, which was specifically for TV underscore reality shows and promos and things like that, because there was a wide variety of composers who had submitted some music to us that we thought, well, this isn't trailer music, but this could be cool TV music. And so we kind of opened that up as well. But now we're non-exclusive. We can work with anyone we want to work with and do anything we want. So it's back to the future.
Oh my goodness. So many questions. firstly, I just want to say, right, it's so fascinating for me to hear this because I kind of want to say thank you on behalf of all of the trailer composers today, because the stuff you were doing back then completely laid the path for everything that we are aspiring to do now and to take forward. I mean, I love the fact that you talked about the use of film score as the trailer score, because it kind of like harks back to silent movies when they were the piano players would have their playbook of classical music, and for a romantic scene they'd have a list of famous classical pieces, and this became kind of like the canon for film score. And what you did with kind of seeing the similarities with the film scores being used in trailers, and then sort of layering and all that wonderful sound design work you did, that has completely formed the canon for what we take as our kind of day job. And I just, yeah, thank you, because everything you did has shaped everything I myself, and I'm sure everybody else listening. I mean, I just love hearing about that as well. Having to sit there and like layer 5 sounds to make a tom, which actually is so easy these days. But you know, back then, I mean, so when I started, I had a 4-track tape machine. Uh,
Yeah.
I never did any bouncing on that because I was always too terrified that I would erase everything I wrote. So yeah, having to like emulate film score. I mean, did you do that with real instruments, or was it always sampled found sound, or was it whatever?
It was for the first almost 10 years or 8 or 9 years, it was just samples and samplers and synthesizer sounds. Now, the other thing I'll amplify, which is the idea is, and thank you for your comments, but and we looked at it as that we were really lucky because what we got to do, not only that we were scoring like film score, but we were scoring and writing music that was, in our minds, the best part of a film score. Meaning, in an action movie, a chase scene is going to be the most intense part of the music that you're going to have. And therefore, it's not the music that's just talking heads and you're keeping an atmospheric pad going underneath. But when they would use film score in a trailer, because a film is a 2-hour arc, a trailer is a 2-minute arc with usually could be 6 music changes within that 2 minutes. So it's compressed intensity, it's compressed time, so that when that music comes out, it's really right out of the gate. And there's, as a film, our initial thing was, wow, I think once we start doing trailers, maybe we'll get recognized and we can start doing film scores, because that was kind of our goal, was to ultimately do film scores. And then when we started seeing how hard some of the people, what they had to go through to do film scores, how being judged by committees, and getting a call at 2 a.m. They've removed 7 frames of film. You're gonna have to adjust the music to now work with that, and it was just, we realized, wow, we're in a really wonderful position. We can pick and choose music, do it the way we really are passionate about it, get it to clients, and they're responding to it, and pick the best parts of a film score, whether it's the big sweeping thematic themes, which for us was the idea is that when people would see a trailer, you'd want them to think, wow, that's the music from the film. And a lot of people were actually disappointed, and they would say, well, I saw that trailer and then I saw the movie, that wasn't the music. And so we felt at that point we did our job well, that we convinced people they were, that they were going to see this epic swelling theme and movie. And yeah, we felt fortunate that yes, we could do the best parts of a film score, which ultimately translated, meaning the most dense and heavy arranged and produced parts of a film score, not just some, like I said, some interesting pad things that would support talking and dialogues. So thank you.
So yeah, I just love this because the process of writing for trailers. I mean, actually, it's funny you mentioned about when people would see the trailers and go see the film. I remember doing that when I go, oh well, where's the music for the trailer? I don't get it. And it wasn't until I was in my 20s that I realized, oh there's people who write trailer music, like and I think actually, if most of us are honest, there is it's not common knowledge that
No.
there are people working hard to make specific trailer music.
Well, I'll tell you a quick funny story that I think is very symbolic. A few years ago, uh, my girlfriend was talking to some of her elderly relatives and trying to explain to them what I do. And one of them, who was very concerned about her, said, "Oh, that's lovely, but does he have any other aspirations in life?" I thought, okay, that's okay. That's
Yeah,
good.
yeah. One day when I grow up, I'm going to be a lawyer.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, writing music for the film advertising campaigns. Okay, it's a little abstract, but all right.
Yeah, yeah. It's one of those things, though. I think when you niche down in any kind of career, when you niche down, people outside of that niche, or even the larger culture with that niche sits in, it's hard for people to grasp. It's like if someone tried to explain the small details of financial advice and the roles played around that. Whoop, I think I would switch off. But I want to go back to your process, Jeff. So
Sure.
obviously you explained then what your process was. What's your process now? Because obviously you talked about the fact that you launched Immediate Music, one of the, if not the most well-known trailer music company. But the wonderful thing is you were a composer and the publisher, so you were thinking not only from one side of the coin, but you were thinking from the other side of the coin. So what is your process now? Because obviously you have to have those two hats on for yourself. So you'll be writing music that is going to go, and this was the case all the way through, but now things have changed. Now we've got these ridiculous sample libraries that sound, to be honest with you, some of the recordings I've done with orchestras don't sound as good as the libraries.
Oh, yeah, no. I mean, even not even now, but even say 10 years ago, one of the things that, or more, yeah, 20 years ago, what we realized is even when you recorded with an orchestra back then, it didn't do enough. You needed to add the edge of some cool sampled drums to cut through. You had to add, or even string sounds that were sampled, put some points on things, because the orchestral process, depending on how it was recorded, how it's mic'd, things can get lost. The separation, the detail, adding drones, adding low sub bass elements. So there's a lot to it, which people don't necessarily, they may take for granted, that they hear and they go, oh, well, that's an orchestral recording primarily. But some of the film scores that you hear, sometimes it's almost like where sound design ends and the orchestra begins, it's an undefined area. That there's this really, which is, for me, I think is really interesting, is the mixture of atmospheric and sound design and orchestral textures as well. So one of the things we've been doing and had been doing is, and fortunately we had done, it was a while ago, but we were given Johan Johansson's, a track of his that they were using in a big trailer, but it needed enhancement to make it, even though it's Johan Johansson, was a genius, it still didn't work as part of the trailer format. And so what we did was we layered some heavy percussion, we added some sound design and did some additional things to it. It still retained, his signature on it, but it worked really well. And the publishers loved it. And at the time, I believe even Johan liked it enough that they then opened up and gave us and have given us a lot of his film scores from past films and from some films that never got completed. And we've been kind of enhancing and trailerizing, for lack of a better word, a lot of Johann's pieces that are going to start coming out. Maybe pretty soon, or maybe waiting another month or two, depending, because a lot of, as you know, a lot of the big films are just waiting on, they're not wanting to get out there in full release yet. But that's been a really exciting process, which is to kind of take our sensibilities of what we've learned and music with an absolute master of like Johann, and combine it. And it's been fantastic experience.
Yeah, I can imagine. And also the wonderful thing about his music is it's, although largely orchestral, it's got...
He's got really some cool, interesting sound design stuff that he's developed. He worked a lot with, and forgive me, I don't know her name. I forget her name, but she's the one that ended up doing the Joker. She was Hilda, or I forget her name, but
I'm terrible with names, Jeff.
yeah,
Sorry.
she's incredible. And so a lot of his scores, though, had really stretched out with some interesting sound design and things that she worked on with him, and has continued to kind of push the boundaries with.
Yeah, well, I think it's kind of like the matching of the two sensibilities. Because what you were just saying about trailer music being this wonderful blurred edge between orchestral and sound design, and Johann's scores being this wonderful blurred edge between trailer and sound design, but not necessarily having that impact. You know, you talk about trailers being the most intense elements of film score. Was it the Sicario trailer?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
That's when it started. That's right.
Yeah, which is an awesome trailer, by the way. Which?
Oh no, I'm sorry. When you say Sicario trailer, no, it was music from Sicario that became it was the trailer for his movie The Great Wall, I think. But it was music from Sicario, and they gave us the elements from the Sicario score, of which we made like 8 or 10 new trailerized versions from that score, which was a very iconic score of Johann's.
That might be what I meant. It's that kind of like lovely kind of swelling low end thing that kind of ebbs and flows like the tide. I'm using obviously very musical language here, Jeff.
No. Look, I'm whatever expression is, that's what matters.
You have completely reminded me that I've forgotten my first question, Jeff. The first question I always ask my guests to loosen everybody up into the situation. See, I was so anxious to have Jeff Fayman on the podcast. I forgot my first question. So I'm just going to do it now, Jeff, just because I'm actually keen for the answer. Jeff, if you were an instrument, what would it be and why?
Well, if I were an instrument, I'm two instruments, but I started off, I was a drummer, and I was very immersed as a drummer. But then I also fell in love with keyboard and let's put it another way. If I were on a desert island and I could only have one instrument, I would have a keyboard.
So a sampler keyboard or a MIDI keyboard or
a piano. I would have a piano.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I see what you did there, Jeff. I will let you get away with shifting the question. Well, in that case, just because you shifted the question, if you were a trailer, what trailer would you be and why?
If I were a trailer, I would be a trailer like a Terrence Malick film, or the music that he uses a lot of, like from Thin Red Line, or music that is kind of hypnotic, ethereal, and really takes you somewhere, as let's say his films do, where it's a kind of a mystical So I would say I could be Tree of Life. That would be kind of trailer I would be.
Nice. Good choice. Like that. Okay, sorry, Jeff. I suddenly panicked when it kind of twigged that I'd missed my first question. But there we go. We got there in the end, guys. Now, I'm very aware that there are kind of like two threads of questions I want to go. I think before we go too far into the composition side, I do want to revisit your progressive rock life. Because
Uh-oh.
well, because I know, because we've spoken before, I know that you've played with some huge names, and that doesn't come about easily, Like, getting to that level of performance is something that needs noting.
Well, yeah, I I've been very fortunate. If you want to do it sort of chronologically, I initially played drums with the original guitar player from Yes. His name was Peter Banks, and so I did some recording with him, did album and rehearsed a lot. Progressive rock was a lot of bands, and the bands that I played with never got out of the practice, whether it was in somebody's living room or a rehearsal room, whatever it was. Mostly you just practiced because you're going to practice 8 or 10 hours a day to be as good as the kinds of bands I was listening to back then, and listening to, Emerson, Lake and Palmer and King Crimson and Yes and Mahavishnu Orchestra and Chick Corea, so these players that you knew, they played and practiced a lot. So luckily I met Peter. He was auditioning drummers in Los Angeles, and I became the only drummer they tried. So I started playing with him. An album kind of came out, but it just never really did anything. And then cut to that, I never played with anyone like in drums. I stopped playing drums after that. That's when I started composing my own music. But I was working jobs, like I was working at Tiffany's and other fine jewelry stores during the day, so I could dress up and sell jewelry. But so at night I could be left alone. And then I started playing in punk bands in the early 80s because I really liked the energy of punk music. I was not interested in sort of the kind of easy listening rock that was so popular in the 70s. And I liked in the late 70s kind of the just this freeness about what punk music is doing, and or not punk even, but bands like the Police, or bands that I would say could really play and do stuff, and King Crimson in the 80s, and things like that. So, but my goal was to start writing my own music and just see where that went, because I wasn't interested in trying to play as a drummer anymore. I wanted to create music. And at some point, a friend of mine that was going to Robert Fripp's guitar craft studies started a friendship with him, to the point where I said to my friend, I said, look, you have a great voice. Why don't we write some music? I'll write and we'll present it to Robert so he can hear how you sing, and you'll write some lyrics and I'll write some music. And we did that, and he played the tape for Robert, and Robert said, oh, I should play on this. I was like, oh, really? And Robert came out to LA. He didn't charge us. He just came out. He loved the music, and he played on our demo tapes of just, our progressive rock demo tapes. And it was just great. I mean, he was so complimentary. And at that point, which was like maybe in the early 90s, I just have maintained a really close friendship with him. And through him, I then met John Wetton, who was the singer of King Crimson for quite a while, and then also for Asia. And I started working with him and doing some recording with him. And then at one point, Robert even connected me with Maynard Keenan of Tool, who offered, and he sang on 21st Century Schizoid Man. He did a version of it. But all these things never really fully came to anything that was other than just an exciting production that I got to work on. I never got or played drums with Fripp or John Wetton or Maynard or anything like that, but I appreciated that they would contribute to music that I produced, that I developed. It was just like the highest honor. I was the biggest fanboy, and to have people that responded and that positively was wonderful. And to me, it was about the music. It wasn't about, I want to be famous, and it was more about how can I best create and develop music that's the most meaningful to me, and other people responded to that.
See, I love that. Well, I just want to say there are quite a few Tool fans in the audience, so they're going to be very happy to hear Maynard's name being mentioned, myself, of course, being one of them. I'm always talking on the podcast about people just following their curiosity and following their enjoyment, regardless of the outcome. And it's really nice hearing you talk about this. And you talk about all these things never really having come to anything. But the beauty of that is they all fed in to everything you then went on to do with Immediate, surely. I mean, from what I've heard of Immediate's catalogue, you can kind of hear everything you were doing. It was like this wonderful melting pot of everything. But I feel like Immediate brought forth the hybrid orchestral thing, which we all know and love today. So yeah, I love that. I mean, what do you think? What would be your advice? Because I'm always saying, follow your curiosity, follow your enjoyment. What would your advice be to the members of the audience?
Well, it's the same as you. I mean, and the advice that I give to any composers asking me, how do you get into the trailer music, or what kind of music should I do? And I think a lot of composers, one of the mistakes, or I can't say mistake, but one of the things they approach is, hey, I can do anything. I can, you want me to write a comedy? Do you want me to write a big swashbuckling thing? And as a composer myself, I think it's important is to do something that's going to set you apart, that you really are excited about. Not something like, gee, maybe somebody wants to hear what kind of a light comedy score I can do. Or, I think that anybody that becomes somewhat known, they become known for a sound and a style that they do, so that they may have a signature style and a sound, and you recognize it. And I think for myself as a composer, I had certainly limitations, but call it desires and passions of what I wanted to express musically. But then it allowed me to really focus in on that, to develop it, to enhance it, to, I really liked really aggressive, driving, percussive based pieces of music, or else really epic, lush, soaring, pieces of music that spoke to me. And that's what I focused on. And that's what I would advise any composers, is to find the kind of music you would just do 24/7, regardless if at the end of the day there's ever going to be a paycheck for it. Because the truth is, there may not be. And to spin your wheels and do something you don't really believe in or feel is you, and at the end of the day, then there's no paycheck, what's the point of becoming something you don't feel? Whereas if you really have a passion and a gift to do something, try to focus on it. Try to do your best to make that your voice and see how that goes.
Awesome advice. Awesome advice. I love it. because I think it's, you know, that mistake you mentioned, I say air quotes mistake you mentioned about aspiring composers saying, I can do anything. You know, I have been there myself because it's out of insecurity that if you don't say that you can do everything, you're not going to get any work.
Yeah,
Where,
well, I think there's a reaction to the fact that people are programmed to think, especially when you're starting out and you're trying to get a film, you're not known. Nobody knows what you can do, and whatever director or producer or somebody that's involved with the film, you don't know what kind of film it's going to be. Therefore, you say, look, hey, I can do anything, which it may work in some cases because you're going to be thrown into a situation where maybe you don't know a certain style of music, but you're gifted enough that you can develop. So I think if it can help get you some kind of work and you can follow it up and deliver, because generally you don't get a lot of chances if you fail. So that if you take on a film and you say, yeah, I can do it, you better be able to do it and do it as well as anybody that's passionately doing it 24/7. That's the point. When you have the luxury to think about, what do I want to send out and give to people to show what I could do, I would say, do what you feel is the best and you're the most engaged in, not that you're doing it as an exercise for some sort of structure or some sort of reward.
yes. Right, I'm going to jump off from there because for me that's not just a career barrier, but that's a mindset barrier. That's trying to get your head around the fear of not getting work is a huge thing. I mean, even when you are getting, I would say, semi-regular work, there is always some voice at the back of your mind as a freelance composer saying, this might be your last, you know, you better work really hard, and etc., etc., etc. However, what creative barriers do you see in yourself and other composers when it comes to writing trailer music?
I think I think there's an instinct that has to be there because, for instance, which I recognized in my partner Yoav, which was we could both sit and listen to a composer's piece of music and at the same time figure out what's working or what's not working, but it has nothing to do with education or schooling. There's an instinct of, oof, that line, it's that string line, it's in the wrong register, or it's really harsh, or that rhythm's not, it just doesn't work with the tempo. It's just, there's something that has to do with instinct that I think you can help people get there, especially people that have desire and talent. But I think there's a certain part of an instinct that has to do, the hard work is, I think, for composers to take a piece of music, they really, let's say a piece of trailer music, this is what I advise to composers. Try to emulate it exactly. Not that you're going to give it out as your own piece of music, but try to understand how this composer created this kind of a horn sound or strings or percussion. Create an arsenal, a template of your sounds that mimics the sound of a trailer and a score you really like. So when the inspiration hits you and you start writing your own piece, a big part of the process are finding and creating the palette of sounds and arrangements that you're going to use in it. And so I think it's one of the only ways, because a lot of people will say, well, why isn't my music trailer music? And I'd say, well, find a trailer that sounds like your piece of music, because I don't know of any. They'll send in some kind of piece of music that might sound like an organ and a cello playing together, and to them it's trailer music. But I haven't really heard a trailer that did that. Maybe a film score in some esoteric sense, but I think you have to first do the work of defining, well, what is trailer music? What does it sound like? And how can I at least get there so that my music, when I show it to somebody, they'll think, oh, this sounds like trailer music. And that's the first and most important step. At that point, if somebody gives me a piece of music and I say, wow, this is really good, but the horn line should continue going up, you start going down. And in a trailer, you don't want to end the trailer going down. You want to keep everything going up. I mean, it's little things and subtleties, but there's ways of movement. There's progressions that it becomes, not tricks, but it just becomes the language that you're not going to hear in a trailer, a choir kind of starting to go, going down. It's going to go up, and it almost becomes a parody. I mean, a lot of music that's so-called trailer or epic trailer music that used to really work in, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever it is, almost sounds like a parody when it's used in certain contexts today, or in South Park or something like that. There's a epic trailer music overload that you can kind of go, oh yeah, they're making fun of, those kind of scores. We're chanting choir and, epic rousing this and that. And so I think there has to be an awareness that quote unquote trailer music has really changed. Trailer music at some points can monthly change, where somebody's just looking for a slowly rising, slow burn build. And, people, I think, would understand what slow burn means, but that became a very big thing for a while. Just a very single piano note with a lot of reverb on it, hit really hard, became a signature sound. There's the brum, all those things. Yeah, they all work and they've become part of trailer and the vocabulary, but it's, these days you kind of have to pay attention to what's being current, what people are using, try to do something very similar like that, including it, even mimicking it exactly, but not to the point where you're going to, get sued. You don't put it out as your own, but you use it as a way of finding your method of production.
It's really nice to hear you say that, because I did that very thing, not with trailer music, but with film scores. I'd listen to the film score and I'd try and mock it up. And actually, it's a really hard task because it not only challenges your ear for harmonies and melodies and rhythms, but it also challenges your ear for the mix, the balance.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, that's actually fantastic advice. I want to talk about something you were just talking about there, which is kind of like the standard of trailer music, not as in standard as quality, but standard as in fashion. The fashions that we have. And as composers, we are often playing catch up with a fashion. Do you think there is a way as a composer you can be ahead of a fashion? Because obviously we're all putting those high piano pings, we're all doing those huge low bohms, we all do very similar string ostinatos, we all do very similar things, we all shove a riser in because they're amazing and fun, but how can we as composers try and do that thing? We're not going to be the composer that sends you a cello and organ demo, Jeff, but perhaps we're the composer that sends you something that's different from what you have heard, but has the same understanding of impact and weight and build and growth that trailer music has.
I think, and again, I think these days, I don't think there's a standard or a structure formula. I think the people that work in trailers, and they're very intelligent people, because they're under a tremendous amount of pressure. And I'm talking about the people who edit, who produce, and the thing that I always hear that I would pass on is they want to hear something that sounds real. In other words, they don't want to hear something that sounds like somebody trying to do an imitation of a piece that another trailer did, but they're not doing it as well. If you create some kind of music, and I don't care, it doesn't matter what it is, but if it's really moving to you, chances are it may move someone else without and that's why, I mean, when we started, I started just doing pieces of music that were just driving drums. That was all they were, just driving trailer tom pieces with maybe a drone at the end. And it became really popular. Just that style became just this sort of percussive action. And I thought, because this is what I love to do. I was just doing it because as a drummer and experimenting, trying to get big cinematic toms and using my skills from having played in African ensembles or progressive rock bands to just doing things that for me were very visceral and impactful and excited me. It excited other people. You know, that became almost a parody down the line of just using driving trailer toms and, you know, but that's why I say I think keeping what you do in a sense that really moves you and that's real is what's going to move somebody else. And that's, you know, I don't know. I can't even, you know, I've had a lot of experience. I don't know what trailer music people are going to look for in 2021. I have no idea. You know, are people going to want really uplifting music to say we're getting through this? Are people going to want, you know, Brave New World sort of gray music like we went through the, you know, I have no clue. But if people are, whoever is composing music composes something that's really real for them, and whether it's, I think that will cut through music that they may hear that's just composed to be decorative music for some purpose. It's like art. It's like saying you approach a canvas and there's so many artists, you know, is somebody going to paint a lush romantic landscape, or somebody going to take and throw paint against the canvas and water balloons? And what's going to move people? They're both considered art, but I think at the end of the day, if somebody's doing something with a value and a purpose behind what they're doing, then it's going to be more meaningful than, you know, painting a little landscape that you know is essentially designed to go in a dentist office. So you know, be an artist, you know, be true to yourself as the first starting point, and then and then maybe use something that you've heard as inspiration to think, wow, I could move in this direction, because all composers or artists are inspired by others, and you take the best from what you appreciate and develop it and enhance it and make something of your own of it.
Love that. It's sincerity. Sincerity beats originality. I think, you know, that's the way I see it, being sincere to yourself and to your output rather than trying to grasp at what's going to be original. Is that right? Is that the interpretation?
Yeah, I think it beats analysis or analysis paralysis of somebody, let's say, that has a lot of academic skills, that's like using those skills only to figure out what's going to be a successful piece of music. You know, Jimi Hendrix, he wouldn't think around, gee, I'm going to start with a B7 and then maybe go down to the low E, because that would harmonically, you know. No, you get in the moment and you kind of channel through you what moves you, and hopefully it will then move other people.
Big time. In fact, I just saw Bill and Ted Face the Music yesterday, and they had analysis paralysis by analysis, didn't they? To make the greatest song in the world. Jeff, I just love our ethos. Ethoses. I'm not sure if that's the right way to say it. We are
whatever
aligned.
it is, I'll take it.
Yeah, that's it.
It sounds good.
Yeah. Our ethos is aligned Because I'm always talking about just doing the stuff you love, and just everything we do is energy that goes into what we do. So if when you're doing it, you're excited and you're enjoying it, and it's still burning that same fire that was the reason we got into music in the first place, then you're onto a winner. And hopefully that will resonate with someone else, and then you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And it's actually it's very nice for me because of me and you have worked together, and the nice thing was you came to me because I had done some music that resonated with me, which is, so it's a kind of a perfect example. You know, I did that music not thinking it was going to necessarily be a huge hit, but I was like, right, I'm just going to do this because I like doing this. You know, you said to yourself, I'm actually a guitarist by trade.
Yeah.
Well, actually a composer by trade, I suppose is probably the best way to do it. But yeah, keyboards. Talking about the piano works, which actually we were lucky enough to win a Mark Award with, right?
Yeah.
Yay! Right. You've kind of plowed through a couple of my questions, actually, Jeff. A lot of them revolve around kind of advice about getting into trailer music, about developing yourself as a composer. So I'm going to launch into the quickfire round because I'm quite intrigued by this. So, what is your go-to DAW, your digital audio workstation?
I'm really old school. I use Digital Performer.
What was Digital Performer before?
I think it was always Digital Performer.
What am I thinking? I'm thinking of Adobe. What's the Adobe one? Audition. I'm thinking of Adobe Audition. Okay, nice. What's your go-to piano library?
I don't really have one. In fact, I have been, I'll sound like a jerk, but for so many years, I've been under so much, let's call it self-imposed pressure to work quickly, to help produce, get things done, create content. I haven't had a chance until this month to start going through a lot of the libraries that I have. There's just so many good ones now. There's so many. I don't know how old that blue piano has been around.
Yep.
I never heard it till just last week, you know? So and then, you know, fast forward that with so many orchestral sample libraries and percussion and synth sounds, it's like this whole world is now open to me, which I'm taking the time to just immerse myself back, which is what I used to do many years ago, but there wasn't nearly the kind of amount of libraries coming out that I could really go through and pick and create my orchestras and now I have some time. So, you know, I'm starting to just go through, and I'm happy to hear a recommendation from you because I don't really know. I've been working with, you know, 12-year-old technology of sounds that really sounded good then and still work. And I couldn't take the time to try, oh, I got to find a different marcato sound for this or a spiccato sound, I just didn't have the luxury to go through it. But now I do. So it's a really exciting thing for me. It's being able to do that.
Well, you're not going to get off that lightly, Jeff, I'm afraid. We'll take that as a caveat, right? That's that aside, and also the audience know that I have a kind of a personal imposed ban on continually buying libraries because I'm often advising people to use what you have. Because often you get that kind of like, oh, is this the best string library? Let's fork out another 300 quid. Oh, I'm not sure. Is it the best library? And although I do think it's a good thing to have a palette of sounds, I also think it's a good thing to use your sounds as a creative limitation. So don't take my advice.
Well, no, I say I followed your advice, but I think, especially if there's composers out there that want to compete in trailers or films, those guys are finding every cutting edge library they can to give them any advantage possible. because I go back and I'll compare, let's say, a horn sound from 12 years ago to say something now, and I'll just go, oof, there's a big difference. I don't now have to use the horn sound from 12 years ago and do all these tricks and layers to make it sound better. I've got something now I can go through. And I would say, furthermore, that part of the process is believing in yourself, meaning, and believing in yourself means investing in yourself, whether that's going to school, taking classes, taking personal training, buying music libraries. It's a show of faith in yourself to say, I believe in myself enough that I'm going to invest and give myself the best shot possible. Because if you don't do that, at the end of the day, you might feel, well, maybe somebody didn't respond because my sounds or my production wasn't as good as someone else who may not have been as good of a composer, but their sounds and their choices were better than mine in that regard because they had these newer sounds. They had this, and I'm not saying you've got to use those sounds to create your career because you find a good horn sound, that's going to make your career. It's more that you're competing against people who are also wanting to make their presentations and who they are sound the absolute best as possible. And we would respond to people that send us demos. You're not gonna get a demo from somebody in any regard and have them say, this sounds good, but imagine if you guys helped it with adding some orchestra or doing something. No, we want to hear out of the box what you do. And if it's something that I sit back and go, wow, this guy knows how to arrange and pick sounds and do that. That's jumping through, a open door right there just by doing that. So don't mean to counter you, but I'm saying, I'm putting it another way. I'm saying, believe in yourself enough that because look how much money people spend to go to school. How much money people spend to take a class at a university or a college and something like that. And to spend $300 for a sound library that actually, even if 3 of the sounds are killer and they help you get inspired and increase what you do, it's worth it, I think.
Touche, Jeff. Touche. However, I'm going to counter that with with one thing. I totally believe in self-investment. There is just a very, very fine line between knowing when you're investing to invest in yourself and to keep the flow of inspiration, or whether you're investing, well, I'm going to change the word, or whether you're buying a new library out of fear that you're missing out on a certain sound. Does that make sense?
I don't know if people are. I think people should be buying libraries because they go and you can hear demos online. You go, I want my stuff to sound like that. How do I do that? Sign me up. I don't think, I'm not saying do this out of fear factor. I'm saying do it out of inspiration when you hear something, and then you then have an opportunity. You compare, well, do my demos sound like this, or does my string sound like this? Well, not exactly, but I guess mine's good enough. It's just look, when we would go and record with an orchestra, we didn't have to have a 70 voice choir. We could have had a 40 or a 30 and layered it, but it didn't do the same thing. And we were willing to take that chance. Or a 95 piece orchestra, we could have had a 60 and you do tricks, but it doesn't do the same. And there's something that people can respond to in terms of it's not just quantity, but there's a quality. And I firmly believe that when you give yourself the best tools and the opportunity to express what you can do, don't do it out of fear, but do it out of that you're feeling you're doing it because it's your best investment in you. Like I said, just like going to school, you're going to invest in that, so invest in what you feel and if you know yourself, then invest in yourself.
Beautifully put. So I just want to say, The thing that I found really interesting with this quickfire round is almost like everyone's almost saying the same thing. But this is the really interesting thing. This is why I wanted to counter that point, because the thing I found fascinating is actually a lot of us composers are using the same libraries. Like, for instance, one of them was going to be Go-To Brass Library, right? And I know for a fact a couple of people who are still very big names in the trailer industry and still produce really high quality, cutting edge trailer stuff still use East West Hollywood Brass. I still use East West Hollywood Brass for an edge on top of other libraries.
Sure.
And that's
I agree at the, and again, I agree in its layering as well. I agree in its layering, and you know what I'm saying is that the playing field is kind of level these days. It's like if you were an old school composer and you had access to an amazing 100-piece orchestra, and everybody that's competing against you has access to this amazing 100-piece orchestra, it doesn't mean anybody's pieces are going to sound the same. Mm-hmm. You know, the way Stravinsky would compose is not going to be the way Philip Glass would compose, or it's not, but they're using the same elements. You're using an orchestra, you're using, so I'm just saying that having access to sounds or good libraries is just a beginning point of just the same thing of like picking an orchestra. But then once you have the orchestra, you know, what your sensibilities should do is certainly something different than what any other composer is going to do.
Very true. And I think what you're still saying to me is, Rich, I'm not answering your quick fire round. It's not. Okay, right. Well, in that case, I'm still very, very intrigued, and I'm gonna, you know, this is my stubbornness coming out here, Jeff. Will you answer those questions if we just put it with the caveat of yes, ignoring the most recent libraries, but if you were to just go with your old favorites, this is just out of personal curiosity now. What would, if you were to grab a piano, load up Digital Performer, what would the piano be?
I think right now I have something called like New York piano or Berlin piano. And I think these are some that were just came as part of the contact when you get complete or those kinds of things. And I would layer some. I might mix and match certain pianos because if I play on the low end, the combination, as long as they were tuned properly, they gave a body, a bigger, fuller body than a single piano together. So I would use tricks to layer them.
Awesome. And if you were again in Digital Performer, what would be the strings? This is a tough one because depending on the articulation, but I want to go for shorts, specifically spiccatos, or you know.
I think the LA scoring strings are really good, but again, that's really old school. I have some Hans Zimmer strings that I haven't even been able to open and play around with yet, so I can't. I'm talking about, I mean, those are like 15 years old, the LA scoring strings, but I think they're really good for those purposes.
They still sound good.
Yeah, and I think that the Albion Spitfire has some great sounds. You know, layering.
Yeah, I absolutely love Spitfire Albion, the very first one they released, which I think they've re-released and they said they tidied it up, but I preferred the original release because it was, it just sounded so beautiful. And like you say, it was like you'd play it and go, oh my goodness, I actually have an orchestra here.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And then the next thing is, what are you going to do with it? Now that you have an orchestra, okay, are you going to sit down and do something with it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. Well, that's the thing. I think the thing I love. I think all of us love to know what gear everyone else is using. It's the nosy neighbor in us, and also I think when it comes to what are you going to do with it, it's actually quite hard to talk in compositional terms that doesn't just become very, very dense very, very quickly. Does that make sense? So if I was to say, well, yeah, I've got this string library and now I'm
Yeah,
gonna...
I mean, I honestly, that's, maybe it's my rock and roll sensibility, but it's like even in rock and roll, I don't want to know what kind of a pillow some drummer puts in his kick drum, or what kind of drum heads he uses, or what kind of, it's just all of that stuff for me is, I like one an immediacy of just play. Let's hear you play, and what are you doing with it? It's more about, that than breaking down, sort of itemizing. And because then it becomes deconstructive to try to figure out, well, this guy's got this sound because he's using these type of drum heads on that drum, but he's got this cymbal like that. But, there's so many choices in all this stuff, whether it's sound palettes, whether it's drums, whether it's guitars. And, it's like, to ask, I find it really difficult because music is an emotion to me. I think that's what it is. And then if I stop trying to think about it as an emotion and try to analyze it, because I don't have heavy technological training, I don't have academic training. So it's more like being in the present moment that I think is very important for me, and I recommend to anybody else. And sometimes what it takes, and I've done film writing in terms of as a writer, sometimes the hardest thing is just sitting down and pulling yourself in, whether it's taking one of these sounds and playing around with it and hearing, wow, that's a beautiful string sound. Then it starts pulling you in, and you start experimenting a little. You start trying things, and then it pulls who you are into the process. And so, it's like, I'm just again, because I'm not really technical, it's hard for me to even advise technically about like the libraries or styles, because I don't know. I know when I hear things, I like that. And I know, like you said, I know I need to layer it. I know I need to do this, but that's all through experience. That's all through sitting down and doing it. And, I could tell somebody, I use the Cinebrass, I use this, but it's, I don't know if that's really going to help anybody other than telling them, if you have Cinebrass, like listen to a score where you hear a brass part that you think, wow, that's an awesome line. Try to create that using your Cinebrass library, or using your Cinebrass library and adding Albion onto it. Like, try to use templates of pieces of score or trailers. And that's what I was saying even in the beginning of this, to create so that you're ready to go when you have that inspiration, and suddenly you've got this soaring French horn line in mind. And instead of going, oh man, where's my library for this? You're ready to go. You've got your sound that's going to give you the chills when you just hear it and play it.
I couldn't agree more. I really like what you said about being in the moment and letting the inspiration hit you when it hits you. Have you got any other advice for composers to help themselves be in the moment when it comes to writing?
You want me to be honest?
Yeah. No, lie.
I will be honest. I will give the best advice to anybody that cares is, when you get up in the morning, it's like, if you imagine yourself like a car, and you get up in the morning and we're bombarded with news, we're bombarded with so much stuff, whether it's in our personal life or kids or anything we're doing, all like that, it's very hard to get centered. And I became for so long and I never was a news junkie. I never cared about it. But in the last several years, I became like a news junkie, especially this year, where, I would just I'd get up and I'd just turn on the TV, and boom, I just was pulled into whatever was going on, and in a certain way, it just sort of, that set the tone for my day of just everything was kind of chaos. And so I made a conscious effort, and it's been very helpful, is I will not turn on TV. I take 10 minutes for myself, and I just spend some time being very quiet, kind of centering myself on some passage or something that's meaningful to me, that about my life, about my goals, or about something spiritual, anything. And, you know, I'm not promoting that anybody has to do anything other than give yourself, and it sounds simple, but to really take 5 or 10 minutes and clear your mind, where you don't have all these things. Oh, I got to go to the market. Oh man, I got this dry cleaning, and then, you know, the kids are, you know, this and that, you know. You have, if you can give yourself that amount of time and focus on wanting to center yourself, and let's see, being open to channeling in the good things that are around you, it will change your approach to when you then engage in the day or do anything you do or sit down and compose. That would be my best advice.
And that's fucking great advice, Jeff. Yeah, my wife and I don't watch the news. We don't have the radio. If the news comes on the radio, we turn the radio off, for that reason, that actually the news is usually just there filled with things that are either going to make you angry or make you scared, and that's not going to help anything. So I very much agree with that.
And again, I then watch the news at the end of the evening, but I'm just saying, for me, I found that to want to start my day off, when I started like that, and again, it doesn't have to even be the news. It can be like, I got to go and pick up my kid, or I've got to do this or do that. And it's take some time for yourself, find a way, and it's not a big commitment, 5 or 10 minutes. Literally, that's all you need. And you'll be amazed at taking the time to kind of quiet and center yourself. It's just, again, the analogy is you wake up, you jump in your car, and you just hit it and drive and go on the freeway, 65 miles, 70 miles an hour, instead of sitting in the car, just kind of thinking, okay, I'm going to kind of try to realize, where am I going today? And so it's you try to center yourself a little bit and better yourself by doing so.
Love that. And I very much agree. I often advise to incorporate silence of some kind in your day, and usually, preferably, before your writing session. So I would often sit down and do a little breathing exercise before I sit down to write, for that reason. It's kind of like if you imagine that you're essentially a pipe, and your pipe is filled up with all this rubbish of thoughts and things that are around you, and then just that little bit of silence clears it, so all the ideas can neatly come into you and through you.
Yeah, I agree.
Electronic high five. Yeah. Jeff, I think I've taken up enough of your valuable time, and I just want to say thank you so much for telling us your story, telling us how you created, such an amazing company, Immediate Music, and that back catalogue has been feeding other composers and inspiring other composers for decades. And, I'm very grateful for it as well. So thank you very much. And I love your advice on all fronts, having silence to let the ideas come in and be more present with your writing, focusing on things that you enjoy, and focusing on things that get you excited in the hope that actually it will excite someone else. I just think that's absolute gold. And like you said, often the most simple advice is the easiest to ignore, but you'll find that simple advice coming up over and over and over and over and over and over. It's kind of like when people say, oh, you want to be healthy? Eat less of this and eat more fruit and veg. It's very easy to ignore because you hear it all the time. So yeah, thank you very much. Is there any more, before we sign off, any parting wisdom you wish to share with the audience of the Trailer Music Composers Podcast?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
I think I've kind of said everything wise and simple I can possibly think of. I think that it's, yeah, I think you did a very thorough job at kind of covering everything. And if you feel you'd like to revisit some things, I'm happy to do that as well. So if there's some other things that you come up with and you think, oh, I wonder how that works, or a different area, sure, I'm happy to do that too.
Awesome. Jeff, you've done the amazing thing that they do in films nowadays where they leave the question mark. Are they going to do a second one? You guys will have to keep tuning in to see if me and Jeff revisit this conversation. Yeah, thanks, Jeff. It's been amazing. And yeah.
My pleasure. Thank you.